Muy buenos días.
A very good morning. I wish to greet this second Global Refugee Forum, headed by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi. I also extend greetings to countries who, together with Colombia, are co-conveners: Japan, France, Switzerland, Uganda, and Jordan. At the outset, I would like to express my country's commitment to the humanitarian attention and the guarantee of human rights of persons who today are experiencing situations of forced displacement or those who are in transit across our country. First and foremost, I would like to tell you about what forced displacement means in our country. We are a country with the highest number of those forcibly displaced in the world, 6.9 million persons. This is as a result of the internal armed conflict which we have gone through in Colombia. This doesn't mean that we aren't undertaking action to address the displaced population. We are taking action ranging from judgments handed down by the Constitutional Court, urging the Colombian state to undertake comprehensive action to grapple with the humanitarian situation, and that they put in place comprehensive return or resettlement plans for those who have been displaced. Now, I have been told, well, I know about this. I've been a victim myself of forced displacement. On the 5th of October 2014, at 2 in the morning, I had to flee with my 2 children because an armed group, as a result of the fact that I was defending the environment in my area, that I was declared to be a military threat. I am well aware of the impact that forced displacement has on families in Colombia. I am well aware of the uprooting and what this means, because culturally speaking, in my country, Colombians are very much rooted to our land. This means that, emotionally speaking, uprooting us from our land not only affects us physically, but also affects us spiritually and emotionally. That is why artists such as the Iniche group have songs which relate to my homeland. They long and they desire to return to their homelands, as the High Commissioner has said. This constitutes chronic suffering for those who experience forced displacement. Therefore, there is a need for this to be addressed as a global crisis, which is affecting very many families across the world. Many of those who've been forcibly displaced in my country are women, and they are heads of families. They are mothers. Not only are they displaced, but also they are victims of sexual violence. This further deepens and worsens the humanitarian situation. The fact that there are no differentiated approaches to address this population also worsens their situation of suffering. And thus, Colombia has become an expert in adopting differentiated approaches, which addresses the population in a differentiated fashion, and I'm referring to the forcibly displaced population. Confinement isn't an area that we talk about here, but it is another form of displacement. Unlike those who leave in my own country, we have a significant number of people and entire communities who cannot leave their land. They cannot be mobilized because they're in the midst of an armed conflict. They are in the midst of a mining land, and this prevents them from moving around. It prevents indigenous peasants and those of African descent cultivating their crops, or those involved in fishing cannot go out to fish for their own survival. This constitutes a challenge. There is a confinement of mobility, restriction of mobility. It affects their health care because they cannot have access to public health care, but also in terms of their electoral participation. Those who are confined, who are limited, are not entitled to exercise the right to their vote. They cannot move from their land to exercise their democratic right to a vote. Thus, there are a whole set of rights that are being violated, and this requires a comprehensive response. Colombia is also the fourth country to host the largest number of refugees in the world. And today, we have about 3 million Venezuelans, which we have welcomed and hosted. 2 million have received a special have benefited from a special migration status. 100,000 children have received Colombian nationality. And these are children who are at a risk of being stateless without any nationality. And Colombia has provided them with the civil right of recognizing Colombian nationality to those children. And this year, 1,000 Venezuelan children will receive their education diplomas because they've been able to attend schools in my country. I believe that this demonstrates Colombia's commitment not only to addressing the forcibly displaced population in our own country, but also addressing those we are hosting who come to our country. We face a migration crisis. In the Darien, 500,000 people have crossed the Darien this year, of almost 100 nationalities. And of course, in the Darien corridor, which is a critical area in terms of armed conflict, an area where armed groups operate. They have been victims of human trafficking. They have been victims of drug trafficking. Migrants are used by drug traffickers to act as drug mules in order to transport drugs. And this further accentuates and worsens the situation of those crossing the corridor. There are people from Cameroon, from Haiti. And I want to flag that the problem of migration in Colombia not only relates to the Venezuelan population, there are also peoples from other nationalities who require care and attention. But this care and support requires shared responsibility, because our state alone doesn't have the capacity or resources to grapple with this situation. Of course, we do have political will, but much more than political will is required. We need resources in order to carry out activities and actions and to place these people at the very core of life and dignity. There is a need for international legislation to be produced, and this is our proposal. This legislation would address IDPs. I know that several nations have refused to acknowledge that internally they do have displaced persons. But we need to acknowledge this, and we need to change this reality. This must be our priority, and it must be our commitment. And Colombia has this commitment. Thus, we have always expressed our commitment to migration and our commitment to refugees. In international terms, I think it's important to acknowledge that there is a global migration crisis unfolding and that addressing the root causes of the crisis, which are related to armed conflict, but also to the development model, which dispossesses and makes people move around. This is related to hunger. This is related to a lack of a guarantee of rights. And refugees and migrants are compelled to leave. No one wants to leave the countries where they were born. No one wants to flee from their homes. People leave because they want to safeguard their lives or they want to seek better opportunities. Thus, we need to think about being flexible, which would allow people to travel, to move around, and thus we should be talking about how states can ensure that their mobility conditions are made more flexible so that people don't feel compelled to cross areas of transit to be at extreme risk, to place their lives and their dignity at risk. Thank you very much.
Humanitaria, ¿sí? Y la garantía de los derechos humanos de las personas que hoy están viviendo situaciones. Por supuesto, a raíz del conflicto armado interno que hemos tenido en Colombia. Ha emitido instando al Estado colombiano a asumir acciones con las desplazadas. Yo no vengo a hablar eso porque me lo contaron. Culturalmente, en mi país, los colombianos y colombianas tenemos un arraigo, un apego, decimos no siempre, crisis global que está afectando a muchas familias en el mundo. La mayoría de los desplazados, esto es un desafío, hay confinamientos de movilidad, entonces afecta la salud porque no pueden acceder. 2 millones han recibido el beneficio especial de estatus migratorio, 100.000 niños que se están violentando y que requieren una respuesta integral.